Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. If they were in the Sun Moon Empire, unless they were like Huo Yuhao and possessed abilities that could conceal entire groups and utilize spatial power, they couldn't possibly succeed in any ambushes with that almost airtight surveillance coverage. They no longer had to leave anyone behind in their Soul Tool front. They could wait until the Douling Empire's situation stabilized before sending someone back to claim it. Huo Yuhao grabbed Tang Wutong's hand as they soared into the sky and flew in the direction that those two Soul Engineer legions had left in. Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection couldn't cover an entire country, but pursuing two Soul Engineer legions wasn't much. Inside Douling City, smoke and dust permeated the air as most of the royal palace lay in ruins from its center after that frightening onslaught. Only the outer walls were still standing in tatters. There were agonizing cries everywhere in the city, and the entire city was in chaos. The city defense army wasn't small, but they could only blankly attempt to maintain order. The royal palace had been destroyed, and that practically eradicated the Douling Empire's citizens' mainstay. Sanshi took Jiang Nan, Yi Gai, Nan Qiuqiu, and Ji Juechen as they arrived beneath Douling City's walls. They watched the smoke and dust as their expressions became increasingly black. Sanshi didn't just have the Heavenly Soul Empire in his blood, as half of his blood came from the Douling Empire, but his mother was also the Douling Empire's previous princess, the previous emperor's youngest sister, who was the current emperor's aunt. Of course, the prerequisite was that the Douling Empire's emperor was still alive. Sanshi had followed his mother to the Douling Empire when he was young, and he had seen his cousin, the emperor, once, though they rarely contacted each other afterwards. The Douling Empire's royal family had vehemently disapproved when his mother had married his father. His mother was the previous emperor's favorite daughter. But the proud princess finally chose her own Prince Charming, and she eloped with Sanshi's father. When she came back with Sanshi. Therefore, the Douling Empire's royal family ostracized Sanshi's family. This matter was considered his deepest secret, not even Jiang Nan knew about it. Sanshi's heart filled with many emotions as he watched Douling City mired in dust and smoke. This was his mother's old home, no matter what. Some blood of the Douling Empire's royal family still ran through his blood after all. Open the gates. Sanshi gazed at the battlement. The gates were closed at this moment, and soldiers patrolled the battlement in solemnity and dejection. Who goes there? The bows and soul tools on the battlement immediately aimed downward. Everyone within the city was still shaky, fearful, and as tense as could be. Under such circumstances, any suspicious figure who appeared could be attacked. We hail from Shrek Academy. We are here to assist you. Sanshi spoke as he lowered his voice. Shrek Academy? How can you prove that? The general on the city walls could barely keep his cool. Sanshi raised his hand and flashed his identity token as a student from Shrek Academy's inner courtyard. Telescopic soul tools were necessary for every empire, and those on the city walls quickly saw his identity token before they made him toss it onto the city wall. Sanshi was worried and impatient, but there was nothing he could do at a time like this, and tossed out his token forcefully. The token reached the top of the city walls, where it was quickly verified before the city gates were finally opened. A general that was a little older than 30 came out. Even though Sanshi and the others seemed young, he didn't dare to disrespect them at all, as anybody who came from Shrek Academy couldn't be judged by their age. The inner courtyard students, who were barely more than 20 AE, already possessed extremely formidable prowess. What's the situation like inside the city? Sanshi asked the general. I'm not too sure. The enemy's attack came without warning. They appeared suddenly, and directly attacked the royal palace before attacking all our important positions. We have sustained heavy losses. The royal palace. The general's face was overcome with grief as he stopped there. Even though he didn't know exactly how the royal palace was doing, he could see the dire situation by gazing in the palace's direction from the battlements. The general had been standing guard on the battlements when the royal palace had been bombarded by that Class 9 stationary Soul cannon shell, and he felt like the end of the world had come in that moment. The entire palace became an enormous orange-red sphere of light, and the terrifying onslaught came afterward. The Soul engineers who were fighting back inside the city were massacred by their frightening enemies before they started going after the city defense army. Even though the army wasn't small, they suffered severe losses because they weren't organized and weren't able to retaliate. Several large buildings were completely laid to ruin. Sanshi's expression was extremely dark, but he was able to keep his cool. Even though we can't be sure if the royal family has any survivors, I hope you can cooperate with me right now to restore order within Douling City. Our companions have repelled the enemy, and both Soul Engineer legions have retreated. Nobody will attack you for now. Therefore, you don't have to guard the city gates anymore. Take your men and follow me into the city. We'll maintain order immediately. I can't do that. The general immediately declined, while his eyes also grew suspicious as he stared at Sansha. Sansha wanted him to abandon his city gates, but how could he do that? Sansha didn't explain. Instead, he pulled off a necklace from his neck. The chain itself was silver and very thin, but the pendant hanging beneath was very peculiar. It was a faint golden token, with 6 jewels embedded on its surface. Every jewel had a different shape and size, but the jewels together formed the words, Douling, and were also emanating faint soul power undulations. The general was astonished when he saw this pendant. He turned his eyes back to Sansha before he went down on one knee. Greetings, Prince. Prince. Jiang Nan, Nan Chochio, Yi Gai and Ji Juechen were all surprised when they heard that word. Since when had Sansha become the Douling Empire's prince? Of course, they didn't know that the previous emperor had given this pendant to his mother when she was his favorite daughter. This necklace was a symbol of the royal family, and also a symbol of status within the royal family. This necklace could only be given when princes obtained their titles, and there were only a few of these pendants inside the Douling Empire. Back then, this pendant had been given to Sanshi's mother because she was doted upon. This meant that Sanshi's grandfather had bestowed upon his mother a status that wasn't inferior to a prince. Afterwards, when Sanshi's mother had eloped with his father, the pendant became a souvenir. The furious emperor even wanted to take it back, but Sanshi's mother had hidden it very well. She didn't want to hand it over, no matter what, and claimed that she wanted to keep it as a souvenir. In the end, it became part of Sanshi's property after he grew up. Not even Sansha himself had imagined that he would use this pendant one day. How he had dreaded this day. But at a time like this, the blood of the Douling Empire's royal family flowed in his body. He had to take responsibility. Sansha retrieved the necklace and put it back over his neck. He lowered his voice and said, at ease. Our affairs are urgent. Follow me into the city immediately, and withdraw the city defense army so that we can maintain internal order. We cannot allow Douling City to descend into chaos again, no matter what. We can't allow any more people to die. Yes. The general swiftly got to his feet, and his originally vacant and sorrowful eyes brimmed with confidence. Even though he didn't know who this prince was, and he had never even seen him before, at least someone from the Douling Empire's royal family was still around. This meant that there was yet hope. As long as Douling City didn't fall into irreversible chaos, there was still a chance to turn things around. The general immediately gave out orders, and withdrew 1,500 soldiers from the 2,000 responsible for guarding the city walls. He led them personally as they followed Sansha and the others into the city. Douling City really needed to be stabilized at a time like this. Sansha revealed his identity and entered Douling City to restore order on this side. On the other side, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had caught up with those 2 Soul Engineer legions. They could see their strict and neat formations in the distance. Huo Yuhao heaved a faint sigh inside as he turned towards Tang Wutong and said, the Sun Moon Empire is far better at training, nurturing, and commanding their Soul Engineers than we are. Look at their formation and their linked soul tools. They are much more advanced than we are. They live up to their names as beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legions after all. Tang Wutong said, then what do we do? I think it's unlikely that we can keep them here in their current state. Linked Soul tools are truly too irritating. If the Soul Engineer Legions didn't have linked Soul tools, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong could ambush and obliterate all of these Soul Engineers by relying on his mysterious imitation and spiritual interference domain. But with the Legion's linked defensive barriers, that chance had been reduced to almost zero. The Sun Moon Empire's legions weren't afraid of being ambushed as long as they could maintain their linked defensive barrier, and with their strength and preparations against an ambush, that didn't seem like a very difficult task. They just had to maintain their defenses at a certain level. Huo Yuhao contemplated for a moment as his eyes closed into slits. He lowered his voice and said, do they really think they can escape my pursuit like that? I wish to see if they can maintain their defenses longer, or if our pursuit is more vicious. Huo Yuhao's storage ring glowed as he spoke, and a single soul cannon appeared in his hands. This soul cannon wasn't large, and its opening was only about 30 centimeters in diameter. It was completely black, and radiated gentle soul power undulations. Huo Yuhao infused his soul power into the cannon, and the cannon immediately hummed softly. He placed it on his shoulder, and didn't even have to aim as he pressed the button to fire. A blinding red light erupted from the cannon, and blasted toward the two Soul Engineer Legions in the distance. This was a normal bursting cannon, and its effects were very simple. It could produce an intense explosive force and high temperatures to cause destructiveness. Huo Yuhao had crafted this bursting cannon by himself. It was a Class 7 Soul tool, but its offensive power was only about that of a Class 5 Soul tool. There was a big difference between a Class 7 Soul tool and a Class 5 Soul tool. Since its offensive capability was only that of a Class 5 Soul tool, then why was the Soul tool itself Class 7? The reason was simple, because Huo Yuhao had tried to maximize other aspects. In this case, it was the cannon's range. Huo Yuhao's bursting cannon could achieve a range of 10 kilometers, which was 10,000 meters. That could already rival certain stationary soul cannon shells. Even Xian Zuan had praised him when he crafted this Class 7 Soul tool. Xian Zuan was very strict and demanding, and he typically didn't praise his students unless they had made some extraordinary achievements. Huo Yuhao was undoubtedly the person who had received the most compliments from Xian Zuan, but even then, those instances were few and far between. A soul cannon that wasn't a stationary soul tool that could fire at such an extraordinary range was something very rarely seen in the history of soul engineers. Even Xian Zuan himself probably couldn't do it better than Huo Yuhao if he had done it himself. There was a reason why Huo Yuhao had crafted this soul cannon, and his goal was simple. He wanted to be able to bait his enemies when necessary. Stationary soul cannon shells were too expensive, and they were also single-use items. Even though Huo Yuhao had expended many rare metals when crafting this soul cannon, and those rare metals were also considered the extremely precious kinds, he could use this soul cannon again and again. Huo Yuhao had fired his cannon, and the cannon shell accelerated through the air. The cannon shell was streamlined, and it was like a date seed as it went straight for the Sun Moon Empire's two Soul Engineer Legions in the distance. This shell's velocity as it left the barrel wasn't considered quick, but what was frightening was its acceleration afterward. The shell immediately sped up after flying for 100 meters, and the shell itself split as part of the original shell propelled it forward, so that the other half could continue blasting forward at an incredible speed. Everything was accomplished in an energy state. It wasn't hard to see how extraordinary this was. Boom! An explosion accompanied an orange-red spark, as the shell detonated on the Soul Engineer Legion's defensive barrier. When Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had ambushed the two legions before this in the beginning, those Soul Engineers who had survived didn't really know what had happened. After Huo Yuhao's sudden attack that almost killed Xie Xianchen, and in addition to their sharp decline in numbers, they would be fools if they didn't know what was happening under such circumstances. Therefore, these Soul Engineers were extremely tense even as they maintained their linked defensive barrier while flying forward. When the single soul cannon shell exploded on their defensive barrier, almost every Soul Engineer's first reaction was to raise their linked defense barrier to its highest possible level. The evil tyrant legion wasn't the only one, even the Imperial Dragon Legion behaved in the same fashion. Two Soul Engineer legions' linked defensive barriers instantly took shape, and they even began charging their linked defensive soul tools so that they could be prepared to attack at any moment. Their reactions were stunningly quick, all extremely correct and precise. Xu Qianyuan and Xie Xianchen, as those legions' commanders, couldn't find any problems with their responses at all. But a problem did appear. This problem was both simple and direct. Where was the enemy? A single soul cannon was fired, but they couldn't find any traces of their enemy at all. Furthermore, that attack was just a simple soul cannon strike that didn't do anything to them at all. The Sun Moon Empire had almost rendered bursting cannons obsolete, because that soul tool didn't have any special characteristics at all. Only certain cities would use bursting cannons for defense, and broadly speaking, beast-ranked soul engineer legions rarely used them. They preferred more destructive weapons such as piercing cannons, which were more effective against protective soul barriers, or decomposition cannons and whatnot. They paused in mid-air for almost 5 minutes, and their linked soul tools were maintained at their highest possible levels from the beginning to the end. But their enemy never appeared. Huo Yuhao held Tang Wutong's hand, and held his bursting cannon with the other. A cold grin appeared on his face as Tang Wutong glanced at him confusedly. "What are you doing?" Huo Yuhao answered, "I'm just telling them that I'm here, so that they'll be more careful and more vigilant." Tang Wutong was extremely intelligent, and she immediately understood what Huo Yuhao was trying to say after a moment's contemplation. "You're making them maintain their peak condition at all times. You're so evil." Huo Yuhao said, "I'm evil. They're not nice people, either. Hi, I wonder how Douling City's doing. I do hope that third senior brother and the others can help stabilize the situation there. At least, I hope they can maintain internal order." Tang Wutong lamented, "Their scheme is so cruel and cunning. If the Douling Empire's elites at the front lines find out about their royal palace, they might just charge out from Shrek City for a showdown with the Sun Moon Empire. If they do that, they will have fallen into Juzi's trap. Juzi is so good at this." Huo Yuhao nodded silently. He was also more worried about what Tang Wutong was worried about. Juzi's plan just made you helpless in trying to foil it. No matter what, we have to obliterate these two Soul Engineer legions before anything else. We can't fight the Sun Moon Empire on an open battlefield anymore, so the only thing we can do is weaken their forces continuously. They can produce many soul tools, but training elite and outstanding soul engineers takes time. As long as we can weaken their soul engineer forces continuously, the day will come when the Sun Moon Empire is no longer so formidable." The two legions realized that they had been tricked as Huo Yuhao spoke, and they continued on their way. It wasn't that they didn't want to search for them, but Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were too powerful. They didn't dare to disperse at all. They could only ensure their safety by maintaining their linked defensive barriers, but that meant that they had to continuously expend soul power. They had already fought back at Lingdou City. No matter how many elites the Douling Empire had mobilized, Douling City was the Empire's capital city after all, and it still had to be defended to quite an extent. The two beast-ranked legions had already expended quite some strength dealing with the city defense army. They had suffered Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's ambush afterwards, and retreated immediately. They hadn't had any proper rest from the beginning until now. At the very least, they had to continue flying. A soul engineer's soul power was very limited. Even in the world of soul masters, not many could regenerate their soul power in battle like Huo Yuhao could, to the point that flying wasn't a problem for him at all. Even titled Doluor would still have to expend some energy when maintaining high flight speeds, not to mention the fact that most soul engineers in the two legions only had around 4 soul rings. They relied on their flying-type soul tools, milk bottles, and other equipment to continue flying for prolonged periods. But this period was ultimately limited, no matter how long it might be, not to mention the fact that they had to maintain their linked defensive barriers as well. Therefore, the two legion commanders' expressions darkened when they realized that their enemy hadn't appeared. They understood what their enemy was doing. There was a very simple yet effective tactic on the battlefield, and that was harassment. Harassment meant you couldn't leave as quickly as you could. Harassment meant you had to maintain vigilance, and that you didn't have a chance to rest at all. That wasn't a problem for top-tier soul engineers, but their subordinates couldn't do that. Their soul power would be completely expended given enough time, and when the time came, when they couldn't maintain their linked defensive formation, then perhaps the end of their world would arrive. What should we do, Brother Xia? Shu Qianyuan whispered at Xia Xianchen. He didn't want his men to hear him, because not everyone understood the tough situation they were in. Xia Xuanchen's expression was black. I'm afraid we're in a lot of trouble, Brother Shu. Our enemies are both powerful and meticulous. Since they've chosen to harass us like this, then they will definitely keep doing it. The only thing we can do is conserve soul power as much as possible, and put as much distance as possible between us and Douling City. Afterwards, we have to find a place to rest. Shu Qianyuan asked, are you saying that we have to find a relatively remote area, and one legion will stand guard while the other legion rests, so that we can allow our men to recover their soul power? Xia Xianchen nodded and said, that's our only option. These two are extremely formidable, and they are able to jump through space. We may not be able to stop them even if we set a trap, and we will have to pay a hefty price for that attempt. Right now, we can only be conservative, and keep this up as long as we can. As long as we can allow our brothers to recover continuously, so that they can maintain their fighting strength, I believe the two of them will retreat, given enough time. Shu Qianyuan punched his palm, as he spoke with a livid expression. We're too stifled. If I ever catch those two fellows, I'll rip their bodies into a million pieces. Xia Xianchen forced a laugh and said, remain calm, Brother Shu. Our brothers are watching. This is the only thing we can do. At least, those two don't dare to attack us in the open. It's too bad we're so close to Douling City. Let's just do it your way. We'll ask everyone to accelerate, and put some distance between us and Douling City before touching down to rest. Shu Qianyuan was a decisive man, and the two men only discussed it for a few moments, before they immediately ordered their soul engineers to accelerate and fly into the distance. Another bursting cannon shell flew at them right at this moment, and exploded against their protective barrier. The two soul engineer legions tensed up, and sensitive state couldn't be resolved in a few moments. They were just accelerating when they subconsciously unleashed their linked defenses to boost its strength, and their movement subsequently paused. Over there. The shell came from over there. Why isn't the commander ordering us to attack? Even though the soul engineers couldn't see Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong, they could still tell where the cannon shell came from. They were members of beast-rank soul engineer legions, and they were typically very arrogant and full of themselves. These soul engineers were starting to grow furious after Huo Yuhao provoked them a second time. Keep your cool, everyone. The Imperial Dragon Legion will not use their linked defensive barrier. The Evil Tyrant Legion will continue maintaining their barrier. Ignore all attacks and continue flying forward. Xia Xianchen calmly gave the order. He was very clear that his enemy, who was in the shadows, hoped to see them fall into disarray. His enemy hoped to see them attack. The soul engineer's soul power would be consumed even more quickly if they used their linked defensive soul tools. His enemy would have accomplished his goal if that happened, while their linked attacks would definitely be useless. Xia Xianchen had directly clashed with those two before, and he was very clear about how powerful they were. They were transcendent Doluo at least, and they couldn't be normal transcendent Doluo. If he didn't have that mysterious crystal stone, he would have been severely injured even if he wasn't killed right away. Furthermore, they also possessed sinister concealment abilities and mastery over spatial power, which forced him to be careful and meticulous. They were in a lot of trouble if one of them was even an ultimate Doluo, and that person could possibly obliterate them all if he unleashed his full strength. Therefore, maintaining their defenses was a must, but conserving their soul power was also a must. Since their opponent didn't dare to mount a frontal assault, that meant that his enemies weren't confident of breaking through by forcing an attack. Right now, they were competing to see who was more patient. Yes, they were competing in patience. Huo Yuhao was also very patient. Back when he was training as part of the Ultimate Soldier Plan, competing with patience was one of his training's very important aspects. He was also waiting to see who was more patient. He was as patient as anyone could possibly be. Huo Yuhao fired once, and then changed angles before he fired again. 10 kilometers was definitely safe. Huo Yuhao's enemy was a huge target, and his enemy couldn't lock onto his position. This made them perfect target practice, and his enemy would have range problems if they wanted to hit him. His enemy couldn't possibly touch him without using stationary soul cannon shells, and such shells were very evident when they were fired. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong would have sufficient time to dodge even if his enemies used a Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. Therefore, their safety wasn't a problem. What Huo Yuhao had to do under such circumstances was continue harassing his enemy so that he could irritate those two Soul Engineer legions as much as possible. Huo Yuhao executed his plan as he fired a cannon shell every 1 or 2 minutes. The two Soul Engineer legions couldn't really adapt in the beginning. Soul Engineers continued strengthening their linked defenses as Huo Yuhao continued to attack them, but everyone knew the story of the boy who cried wolf. These Soul Engineers started to adapt after a while. Their enemy was just firing with a bursting cannon, and every single one of these Soul Engineers possessed soul tools with stronger attacking capabilities than that bursting cannon. Aren't you just harassing us? All we have to do is ignore you. We can rest after flying for a little while longer. Huo Yuhao continued to harass them even after an hour. However, the Imperial Dragon Legion and Evil Eye Tyrant Legion's Soul Engineers no longer strengthened their linked defensive barrier. The Imperial Dragon Legion's Soul Engineers didn't even release their own linked defensive barrier anymore, and both parties seemed to be at an impasse. Huo Yuhao's harassment also seemed to lose its effectiveness. Huo Yuhao fired another bursting cannon shell before he suddenly withdrew the cannon with a flash of silver light. Another new soul cannon suddenly appeared on his shoulder in the next moment. This soul cannon was different from the bursting cannon. First, it was longer. This soul cannon was more than 3 meters long, and even Huo Yuhao's long frame seemed uncoordinated when he was carrying it on his shoulder. Second, this cannon's style was different. This soul cannon looked like a long spear. The spear's tip was at the front, while the back of it looked something like an umbrella, like the tip of a gun, and then there was the spear's shaft. Only the section on Huo Yuhao's shoulder seemed relatively thicker. When Huo Yuhao infused his soul power into it, the entire soul cannon radiated peculiar dark green colors. Circle after circle of dark green hues coursed forward before all the light concentrated at the cannon's tip. The green light was deep and profound, and one could see upon closer inspection that there was actually a tiny black hole that had appeared at this soul tool's tip. This black hole wasn't the kind that swallowed everything. Instead, it was a phenomenon that would happen when the air shattered. Normally, offensive strength and speed could tear the air apart when they reached a certain level, and this phenomenon would appear. But the space that had been torn apart would swiftly close back together, while the broken space that was happening right now was continuous. The gash didn't seem like it was about to close at all. Tang Wutong was purely a soul master, and she didn't understand anything about soul engineers at all. But even so, she could feel how terrifying this soul tool was. Huo Yuhao didn't fire casually this time. Instead, he activated spiritual detection as he lifted that soul cannon to his shoulder and aimed. He was sharing his spiritual detection with Tang Wutong, and she could naturally see who he was aiming at, one of the Imperial Dragon Legion's Soul Engineers, who was in the inner circle and resting. TCH, an ear-piercing blast could be heard as a dark green ray burst forth. Huo Yuhao released Tang Wutong's hand in the moment right before he fired, and his body dashed forward like a lightning bolt. Huo Yuhao crossed several thousand meters in a few seconds as he flew forward at full speed, and he neared his enemy's defensive soul barrier. Huo Yuhao was less than 3 kilometers away from the protective barrier when the dark green ray was fired. Everything had been calculated through spiritual detection. The dark green light flashed once before it disappeared, and it was like an extended arrow as it struck the linked defensive barrier. The barrier quivered as a trace of green suddenly appeared on its surface. The barrier didn't seem any different on the whole, but a small hole appeared at the spot where the barrier had been struck. The Imperial Dragon Legion, and Evil Tyrant Legion's Soul Engineers witnessed a harrowing sight in the next moment. Even if they could live through this ordeal, they would never forget what they saw. The dark green ray fell accurately on a Soul Engineer from the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineering Legion. This Soul Engineer's automatic protective barrier was immediately activated, but was obliterated in the next moment. And then his entire body was annihilated. The Soul Engineer's body quivered faintly as the dark green ray struck him, and he couldn't even cry out before his body was vaporized into countless green specks that dissipated into the air. Those green dots drifted through the air and seemed to contain a strange force. They couldn't fly out because of the Legion's defensive barrier. Startled cries could be heard as almost every Soul Engineer activated their protective soul barriers at the same time. That green beam was just too frightening. Even though they were Soul Engineers, they had never seen something so sinister before. How could anyone know that that green light was threatening their lives? Huo Yuhao turned and left after his successful strike and escaped into the distance. Xie Xianchen and Xu Qianyuan looked on with widened eyes and slack jaws, and their hearts were beating out of their chests. Normal Soul Engineers couldn't recognize what that was, but how could they not know? That soul tool could pierce through their linked defensive barrier and instantly annihilate one of the Imperial Dragon Legion's Soul Engineers. Wasn't that a formidable Class 9 single-target offensive soul tool, a super decomposition cannon? Back then, Huo Yuhao had convinced Xian Ziwen with a Class 8 decomposition cannon. The one he was using wasn't a Class 9 cannon. It was a Class 9 decomposition cannon. Decomposition cannons were terribly frightening no matter what class they were. Anybody who was struck had almost no chance to survive. A decomposition cannon's most salient characteristic was its ability to decompose all energy. Any protective barrier was like paper to such a cannon, and if the target wished to stop a decomposition cannon's attack, the target's defensive capabilities had to be 3 times stronger than the decomposition cannon's attacking force. Not even a Class 9 Soul Engineer unleashing his protective soul barrier with his full strength could block a Class 9 decomposition cannon's attack. A linked defensive barrier had to be raised to an extremely high level to stand a chance against a Class 9 decomposition cannon. These 2 Soul Engineers could block this attack if they were at their peak condition. But they were too far from their peak condition right now. They had lost more than 200 people, while only half their number was maintaining their linked defensive barrier. They didn't have a chance at stopping that decomposition cannon. A single life was taken just like that. But that wasn't the most frightening fact, because the most frightening fact was that the 2 Legion's Soul Engineers began to feel intense fear riling their hearts. Don't panic, everyone. Continue maintaining the linked defensive barrier. That was a Class 9 decomposition cannon, and it cannot be fired continuously. Even Class 9 Soul Engineers can only fire it once a day. Xie Xianchen didn't hesitate as he hollered at his Soul Engineers. Even though decomposition cannons couldn't be used continuously, Xie Xianchen was spouting nonsense when he claimed that the cannon could only be fired once per day. But he had no choice but to make that claim, because his legion would fall apart otherwise. Xu Qianyuan glanced at Xie Xianchen. He didn't stop him, but his expression was turning darker and darker. Their enemies weren't just transcendent Doluo. There was a Class 9 Soul Engineer, and that was something they hadn't expected even in their wildest dreams. The bursting cannon that was being fired at long range before this could be considered a normal soul tool that any soul master could use. But they had never heard of the Doluo continent's empires possessing a Class 9 decomposition cannon. This video will end here.